Has your life become a unimaginable nightmare? Have complex geopolitical goings-on robbed you of whatever peace this bastard life once afforded you? My friend, you are stressed. You need a holiday, and boy do I have just the place for you. The wonderful town of Priville. I'm Rock Typewriter, travel journalist extraordinaire, here to introduce you to this wonderful little slice of lakeside heaven. From its eerily silent forests to its decadent modern-day department stores. Get lost in the festivities as you rub shoulders with the darn friendliest locals you ever did meet. Oh, I'm sorry, you there, sir? What's your favorite thing to do on a night out in Priville? Well, that was strange. Why are you wearing my clothes? And if you book right now, not only will you receive 15% off, but you can participate in the Termina Festival, a 3-day celebration of the moon god Rare, whose light reveals the madness within us all, for whom the streets will flow red with blood. Must have missed that day in Sunday school, folks. I'm sorry. Is someone laughing? Wherever I go, I can hear laughter.
Fear and Hunger is a 2018 turn-based RPG that feels like it hates you, tasking the player with reaching the bottom of the worst place imaginable, a horrifying dungeon of stone, shadow, and gore, where possible outcomes include but are not limited to drowning in a toilet, having your skin ripped off by lizard people, being stomped to death by a headless wizard and his giant bull friend, only for the game to then gently whisper to you, you haven't even met the moon dinosaurs yet. And you're like, what? The moon dinosaurs? Fear and Hunger's high difficulty and utter malice could be a reason it languished in relative obscurity for nearly 5 years, before exploding in popularity in 2023, to the point that you can now regularly find cute Fear and Hunger fan merch in convention artist alleys. And if you had told me that 3 years ago, I'd respond with, wow, 2026 sounds awesome, leaving you no choice but to stare into the distance and mumble, yeah. The reason Fear and Hunger blew up was simple. There was nothing else like this. Its pitch black take on fantasy, bleeding into its brutal, counterintuitive game design, resulting in a horrifying journey into the darkness beneath the earth and discovering the cruel things that lie there. It was an experience so unique that it immediately presents a problem. How the hell do you do that again? The question I'd like to ask in this video being, what cruel things wait in the dark of Fear and Hunger 2? That answer is complicated, because so much of what's compelling about Fear and Hunger 2 is what it isn't. It's easy to imagine a potential Fear and Hunger sequel set in a bigger dungeon with more monsters, but what we got is so bafflingly not that. Don't get me wrong, there are similarities. This is still a story about a group of strangers entering a horrifying location, but whereas before we were choosing from knights, wizards, and barbarians, now we pick from mechanics, doctors, and teenagers, mostly ordinary people, each of whom has their own reason for boarding a train to Priville before they all simultaneously fall asleep and experience the same dream. A strange man under a massive grinning moon informing them that the festival of Termina has begun, a 3-day orgy of violence in which survival is only guaranteed to the last person left alive, only for our characters to awaken and find that their train has broken down, now trapping them in the town of Priville. Hello friends, you will notice that I am speaking to you without any music, which can only mean that I have an announcement. You are likely somewhat aware of Eyepatch Wolves, my fake anime that till now has existed only through my merch collection. Well, we are launching Eyepatch Wolves as a webcomic, and here is the trailer.
You ready? Crawl. Let's do this!
This city gets crazier and crazier. Sometimes I don't even recognize it anymore.
Hey, Crow!
You want to be remembered by a tombstone.
Something's not right, Crow.
Wolf, Crow, welcome to tomorrow.
Look at me. Look at what you made me.
This city is a virus, and I am the vaccine. Stay with me, kid. Just stay with me. You can't run from this, Crow. You're gonna have to face it someday.
The first 5 chapters are available for free right now over at eyepatchwolvescomic.com, with further chapters unlocking weekly. I co-wrote this series and I'm extremely proud of it, as I am the very talented group of people who helped make it. I'm not going to tell you have to read it, because I do not have that authority. Luckily for you! But if you enjoy my videos, I think you will find something to like here. Anyway, that's it. I love you. Thank you for the support. Back to Termina. Also, this might be a good time to mention that Fear and Hunger deals with a lot of very unpleasant material, both visually and thematically. So if you have any concerns there, maybe check some content warnings. When you take your first steps into Termina's world, it can feel jarring, and not only because of the daylight-filled, wide-open spaces that feel worlds apart from the dark, choked hallways of 1, but also because of the free, immediate, and reusable save bed of the game's tutorial area. Something that could be an expected part of any other series, but in Fear and Hunger, well, in Funger 1, save beds were rare, and when you did find one, you were forced to flip a coin, heads being save your game, and tails the equivalent of a swift kick to the dick, being hurled down a flight of stairs before being set on fire. So imagine my shock when encountering that first save bed and the coin flip mechanic is just gone. And it's not the only thing. The ultra-punishing torchlight mechanic, gone. Stepping on a nail leading to a swift, infection-based death, gone. Stumbling into a bear trap, immediately destroying your run. Oh, okay, that one's still there. Hell, you don't even have to sacrifice children anymore in order to regrow your limbs. Not that I ever did that. Early game enemies are less difficult, you now have more options in combat due to the rev system, there is a full map now, and food and health items are in such an abundant supply, they may as well change the name of the game to Fear. I'll be honest with you, that was a lot funnier when I wrote it. So many of these changes feel like they alter what Fear and Hunger is, transforming everything from its most granular mechanics to the very shape of its world. While it had multiple routes and forked at the end, Fear and Hunger's structure was one of a constant linear progression downward, and that progression mattered because you'd start in the game's opening courtyard fighting some angry dogs before descending down the dungeon as its fantasy tropes give way to something much worse, ending in battles with unknowable cosmic entities that exist on the brink of reality. That linear progression from fantasy dungeon to cosmic nightmare, that is such a huge part of what Fear and Hunger was. This journey into darkness that is so much worse than you could have ever imagined. A feeling only possible because of how the game was structured, which is why it's such a shock that that same structure is completely absent from Termina. Rather than a gradual progression downwards, Termina takes place on a giant open world style map, with locations interconnected by multiple routes, including a giant subterranean sewer system. Now obviously there's advantages to structuring a game's world like this, but the trade-off is that gradual linear shift from fantasy to eldritch horror that just doesn't exist in Termina, and if you're looking for it, you will be disappointed. This is part of what makes Termina kind of divisive and even difficult to talk about when compared to the original. People love both games, but there's also an infinity of online arguments arguing over which is harder, which is better, which is scarier, and honestly, having spent over 100 hours in each, I would say that what's great about Fear and Hunger, it just isn't in Termina. But what's great about Termina isn't in Fear and Hunger. Where that starts is with the town of Priville. One of the advantages to Termina's more open structure is it allows for the town of Priville to feel more like a real place. This isn't a series of hallways funneling you towards an end goal, it has an ecosystem. There are signs everywhere that this was a normal place where people lived. And at times it can feel like a shockingly ordinary location. Priville has shopping malls, it has apartment blocks, it has hotels and advertisements for stage plays. There are refrigerators, televisions, radios, strangely emasculating washing machines. All relatively modern conventions that make Priville feel infinitely more relatable than the dungeon of Fear and Hunger 1. Well, I say relatively because Priville is based on the 1940s. And yes, they did actually have refrigerators back then. It was in fact the era of the beautiful General Electric 1947 to 1952 model, my personal favorite refrigerator of all time due to its gorgeous bevel design and 2-chamber compartments, which offers several advantages over its main rival, the GE Forge, which, let's be real, was a fucking piece of shit. I'm pretty sure it is actually that specific General Electric model used in Termina. And it's that commitment to authenticity that gives the town of Priville such a distinctive 1940s feel. As outside of games where the main goal is blasting Hitler in the bollocks, the 1940s are relatively unexplored territory for video games. But beyond this, what makes Priville truly special is how it draws from the darkness of this era. The darkness of Fear and Hunger original was something contained, something shrouded in shadow beneath the surface of the earth, inflicting itself only on those foolish enough to enter the dungeon. But in Termina, that darkness has been belched outwards and is now infecting the outside world and the innocent people who live there. That's what Priville is, but in a way that parallels one of the most horrifying eras of human history, namely World War I and II. A lot of media today still romanticizes the idea of the Great Wars, when in reality, this was a time when ordinary people sold their dreams for promises of battle and glory, only to have their bodies fed to the industrial meat grinder of war. A time when gaps between nations, created by the ignorance and ego of their leaders, would be plugged by the lives of tens of millions of people, the survivors of which returned with broken bodies and shattered minds. One of the most palpable themes of Termina being this idea of the human body as a resource to be processed, something to be drained of life and then contorted into something else. Like the concept of being human is merely one stage on a conveyor belt of some horrific industrialized process, where hundreds of human lives are compressed into these weaponized abominations of war. The Great Wars are times when human life stopped meaning anything, and that concept is repeated over and over throughout Priville, in the mountains of dead bodies crammed into the trenches of its nightmare realm, or the thousands of limbs protruding from its massive and terrifying wooden structures. One of the first things you do in the game is step through a dreamlike tunnel of suitcases, which is likely a reference to the abandoned luggage of Jewish people who perished during World War II. People who packed these cases with hopes of a better life, only to disappear into the industrialized murder of the concentration camps. It's horror on a scale that's genuinely unfathomable today, but this is the horror of Priville, and it is that world that our characters arrive into, and the backdrop upon which the events of the game unfold. So far, we've talked about two of the big changes to Termina, its more open structure and its setting. But there is another, and this one is not concerned with space, but time. I want to take you through an early run I made in Termina in which I immediately acted the bollocks and attacked one of the other train passengers. This locks you into a route where you are captured by the other survivors and imprisoned aboard the train, and there you shall remain for the rest of the run. Aside from urinating yourself, very little happens over the course of this run. You see the odd strange thing and are occasionally visited by Olivia, who seems nice, but that's about it. But what's interesting is the very particular viewpoint this route gives you of Termina's most dramatically different new system. After struggling in futility, you will be given the option to rest, at which point your character will fall asleep and you'll be brought to the Tower of Termina, a dreamlike location which serves as a kind of checkpoint where you'll be able to level up your abilities, save your game, and view a list of the train passengers who are still alive. However, the real function of resting is to move time forward. As mentioned, the Festival of Termina takes place over 3 days, and each day is divided into morning, afternoon, and evening, resting being the only way to advance from one time period to the next, until the night of day 3, where something very bad happens, but I'm sure that won't have horrifying ramifications later on or anything. This changes things because what it teaches you is that there is actually a cost to saving your game. Time, as now you know that you are limited to 9 saves across your entire run. And suddenly that free reusable save bed doesn't seem so free or reusable. There's also an additional cost to advancing time. Events taking place in your current time period can conclude if you rest, which may cause you to miss scenarios entirely. And we can actually see this on the afternoon of day 2 when something strange occurs. Two other train passengers, Marco and Tanaka, die. And seeing as we were stewing in our own piss aboard the train, it means something in the outside world killed them. But what's important here isn't what that thing specifically was, but the system that allowed it to happen. When you select one of the 8 playable train passengers in Termina, the remaining 7 characters, as well as the 6 non-selectable train passengers, will take on the roles of non-player characters, but that doesn't mean that they become inactive in this world. Rather, each non-player character has their own story, route, and schedule that actually unfolds over the course of the 3 days. So, take the morning of day 1. You could follow Karen towards the river, or you could find Bella in the West Bunker, or you could go hang out with Henrik in the Mayor's Mansion. But if you advance time to the afternoon of day 1, each of these characters' routes will progress and they will be no longer in their previous location. I could add a horrifying asterisk to that statement, but I'm not gonna. This system is so intricate that you can actually map out different characters' routes across the 3 days. And it's when you do this that you start getting a feeling for the depth of Termina. Take, for example, if we don't select Levi. On the morning of day 1, Levi will immediately disappear from the train, and this is because he has traveled north towards the Priville outskirts, where we can find him in the basement of the large house. We can't interact with Levi here, and he just runs from us, and from what I can tell, travels through Termina's sewer system, where a doppelganger may steal his form, don't worry about that, before Levi arrives at central Priville, where he is overcome with withdrawal from his drug addiction and collapses in the basement of the restaurant near the Great Steps. And this is how he spends the afternoon of day 1, until the evening of day 1, when he'll venture back out into the streets of Priville, heading west through its back alleys, and unfortunately here, he'll encounter Caligora. Caligora is another train passenger and deeply unpleasant individual who can appear pantsless before you if you sleep at the wrong bed at the wrong time, but being a sex creep is not quite enough for Caligora, and he's also taken to murdering other train passengers, now cornering Levi before bashing the little child soldier's brains in. Because Levi is now dead, this marks the end of his route through Termina. And so, Levi's route goes like this. He flees to the village outskirts on the morning of day 1, before making his way to central Priville on the afternoon of day 1, which is where we find him in the restaurant, before venturing back out that evening, where he will be attacked and killed by Caligora. That is Levi's path through Termina. But here's the thing, we can actually alter Levi's route by interfering at different points of his story. So say we find him collapsed from withdrawal on the afternoon of day 1. If we have the heroin item, we could trade it to Levi and recruit him into our party. And if you think taking advantage of a former child soldier's drug addiction to bend him to our will is the worst thing we're going to do in this video, I have some terrible news for you. What this means is that in this timeline, Levi, now with us, will not be present in the Priville back alleys that evening, meaning Caligora cannot turn his brains to strawberry jam. But there's also another way we could alter this event. Like instead, we could choose to track down Caligora before the evening of day 1 and murder this pantsless dipshit ourselves. And because of death, he will no longer be present to hurt Levi that night in the back alleys. Or we could just show up in the back alleys that night and stop Caligora there and then. But what's kind of insane is what can happen from here. Say we save Levi but fail to recruit him into our party. In this scenario, on the evening of day 2, Levi will travel north to the Priville orphanage where he was raised. This is a very dark location that I will explain with a single image and your brain will fill in the rest. Yeah. By the night of day 2, you'll start to hear strange noises throughout Priville, and may even encounter this horrifying monster with a rifle protruding from its face. This creature is the Weeping Scope, and the Weeping Scope is Levi. See, one troubling aspect of the Termina festival is that insanity tends to cause horrifying monstrification, and whatever Levi encountered in the orphanage, it caused him to transform into this creature. Levi can then, on day 2, travel back out into Priville as the Weeping Scope and attack train passengers Karen and Marina. And if Karen and Marina happen to be dead, Levi will begin to stalk the player, following them back to the orphanage and even into the rare dimension, making a difficult part of this game far more difficult. This is the kind of cause and effect that can unintentionally wreak havoc on your run. Like, imagine killing Caligura on day 1, completely unaware that you were unleashing a boss enemy into the streets of Priville on day 2. That's all pretty intricate, right? Well, multiply everything we just said by 13 other characters, all of whom have their own routes and scenarios that you can interfere in, with potentially disastrous consequences from those decisions, and you begin to get a sense for the insane little clockwork world that is Termina. I'm hoping by now you're starting to get a sense of how fundamentally different Termina is from Fear and Hunger, and I think that difference is a big part of the reason that players of the first game tend to be a little reluctant to get into the second, because the idea of a game that difficult spread across 14 characters and 19 time periods, that is a lot. But personally, I think the reason that Termina is more forgiving in some of its individual mechanics is to balance out the increased complexity of its map and time system. That is all to say, I don't think either one of these games is more difficult than the other, I just think they're difficult in different ways. But it doesn't matter, because the way you get better at them is the same. You play them, you make mistakes, you watch runs go down in flames, and trust me, in flames they will go down. And then you learn what you can and you try again. And to illustrate this, I would now like to take you through one of my most disastrous runs in Termina. And the character I'll be playing as, Levi. Levi is a very tragic character in Termina, not only because of but also because after this, I'm sure a 13-year-old Levi was thinking, well, at least things can't get any worse, only to immediately be conscripted into a hopeless world war where he was traumatized so badly that by the time the game starts, he's barely able to communicate with the other train passengers. And so, my goal would be simple. I was gonna help this little guy find some resolution and closure, and in doing so, creating a feel-good narrative that I could weave throughout this entire video. And that went poorly. Because of the specific choices I'd made in Levi's character history, my Levi started the game with the slight impediment of being, addicted to heroin. Heroin is a strange item in Termina in that it grants your character a massive buff to all stats, but as soon as it wears off, you enter the withdrawal state and now receive a massive penalty to all stats. The only way to cure withdrawal being to pound another vial. And this is a problem because starting a run in Termina is like being a baby bird leaping out of the nest for the first time, and you're flapping your wings trying to build as much momentum as you can, i.e. gathering resources, weapons, and allies, but unfortunately for me, my baby bird was addicted to heroin. He was so weak that it would take multiple turns to take out a single limb, and so slow that even early game enemies could move first, both factors that led to me absorbing a massive amount of damage in every fight. And what made this worse is that Levi's rifle wasn't even the lifeline I hoped it would be, as its limited ammo made it useful for maybe 2 to 3 encounters at most, at which point I was basically defenseless. This forced me to endure a parade of failure in which I was slashed, beaten, stabbed, eaten, used as pig swill, and in one especially unfortunate instant, nakedly crucified to death. And this is how I spent my first session with Levi. And it was honestly, massively demoralizing. I had beaten Fear and Hunger on Terror and Starvation on stream, and yet now, the early game enemies of Termina were making me feel as inept as a Fred Durst guitar solo. The sensible thing to do here was to restart my character, but not being a sensible person, I don't like to abandon Termina runs before day 3, as I think that finding yourself in difficult situations and struggling through them is the Fear and Hunger way. And so what I needed to do was take a step back and think about what was going wrong on this run. And when I did, I realized that I had fallen into the same trap I had when I'd started playing the first game. That was treating Fear and Hunger like it was a traditional RPG, when in actuality, succeeding in these games requires a mindset somewhere between an immersive sim and a survival horror. So I needed to look carefully at my situation and develop a new approach. My strengths were not much, basically my rifle, and that's about it. But my weaknesses were many, but mainly my withdrawal diminished stats, making combat barely an option. Taking both these factors into account, I developed a new approach. I would play Termina like it was Resident Evil 1 and I had just run out of bullets. This meant avoiding combat at all costs and stealthing past enemies as much as possible, only spending my precious bullets when it was absolutely necessary. This caused a total perspective shift in my playstyle. I was now measuring every scenario, constantly weighing up whether I could sneak by an enemy unnoticed and the potential health loss if they did catch me versus blasting my way through unscathed but at the cost of my very limited ammunition. And honestly, it was thrilling. Slowly, carefully, I started to make progress, mapping out different routes in my mind and measuring the most efficient way through them, till the afternoon of day 2, where I made it to Central Priville. Central Priville is the start of Termina's mid-game, where the difficulty ramps up significantly and also where you can feel the game's horror creep into focus. A lot of Termina's enemies feel designed to provoke a kind of dread and hopelessness within the player, one of the best examples of this being the Bobbies. Aside from setting my ancestral blood ablaze, the Bobbies are an especially cruel little piece of game design in how they mess with some of the expectations established in Fear and Hunger 1. Like, take the most reliable combat tactic of the first game, severing an enemy's limbs in order to lower their potential danger. And so, when you see the Bobbies with their 3 limbs, which they will use to very quickly bludgeon you to death, the solution is obvious. Destroy those limbs so they cannot do this. Only for you to watch in horror as those limbs grow back. This is something no creature ever did in Fear and Hunger 1, and so when it happens, it's like the game is just staring back at you and asking, "Oh, I remember that. Now what?" And this isn't even the only cardinal rule of the first game that the Bobbies break, as when you do finally kill them and breathe in that moment of relief in the knowledge that you are now safe, they just get back up and continue to hunt you. And again, this is something that never happened in Fear and Hunger 1. The Bobbies' design feels precise, surgical in how they are targeted at tormenting veterans of the first game. But not every creature in Priville Central operates on such a subtle level. Some work a little more, like this. This party-wiping, limb-severing, run-derailing, walking game over screen is called a death mask. Death masks are dramatically more powerful than most enemies, to the point that fighting them won't be a viable option till very late in the game, and they also move extremely quickly. But the truly insidious thing about them is the specific way they can fuck up your run. Death masks don't have a set location in Termina, but you see these random coffins strewn about? Well, once you hit Central Priville, Priville, the game will spawn 2 random death masks into 2 random coffins and place those coffins somewhere on your map, a location you will only discover when you randomly walk by one and that lid creeps open. The death masks are so powerful that this can mean the end of your run right there and then, but even if you do get away, a more overarching problem emerges. See, death masks remain persistent in the area they spawn, and this means you can get away, forget about them, only to come back later and oh god. This can mean that entire swaths of your map can become haunted by death masks and therefore cut off to you, forcing you to reroute your run through more dangerous territory. Because of this, you will find yourself creeping past every coffin in Priville, hoping, praying that that lid does not creak open. The horror of both the bobbies and the death masks is very game-y, i.e. direct and mechanical, the game design of each basically turning them into very creepy and stressful logic problems, but problems that can be understood and even solved, as there are strategies to both that make them easier and therefore less frightening, but unfortunately for the player, they are only one layer of the horror in Termina, and the second I would like to now convey with a little section I call 3 short stories of the ambiguous horror of Priville. In one particular session while exploring Central Priville, I recruited Marina, first encountering her in the bookstore of Priville and then outside the Church of Almir. Later, I returned to the bookstore only to find Marina still there, the issue being that she was also in my party. I was sure that this was a glitch, but when I spoke to this second Marina, oh no, this is a doppelganger, one of the many strange fake people that have begun to appear around Termina, who will attempt to trick you into thinking that they are your fellow train passengers. The difference between the doppelgangers and the previous enemies we talked about is that the doppelgangers aren't especially dangerous. Instead, it's the context around them that makes them unnerving. Take the encounter with Olivia's doppelganger, who can be found frolicking in the deep forest. The problem being that you know Olivia uses a wheelchair, and if Olivia is in your party, this moment feels nearly profoundly cruel, like the town itself has spawned this creature to mock Olivia. Aside from a single vague line, there's no real explanation for the doppelgangers. They do have a technical reason for existing in the game, and that was to help solve a scenario issue where multiple instances of the same character were occurring on the same map. But their lack of explanation only makes their existence all the more disturbing, creating this ambiguous, uncanny kind of horror, and this is only the beginning. In another session of Termina, I was exploring the forest of West Priville, a location I typically avoid due to, fucking reasons. See, the forest typically sounds like this. So imagine how eerie it was when one night I entered the forest and just hear something. It sounds like singing. I follow the sound through the forest path and eventually come to a clearing where I see a masked woman letting out this ghostly wail. You can try and talk to her, try and ask her who she is or what she's doing, but she won't react. She'll just continue to sing her haunting song, her gaze fixated on the moon above you. And that's it. You can't fight her, she's not a part of a quest line, she's just this bewildering person you encounter in the darkness of the forest. And in that, there's no way to solve her. You're just left stew in the discomfort her existence creates. When you enter the Priville department store, you're met with nothing. Just an eerie silence punctuated by the sound of your footsteps. There's no enemies, nothing of value, but that's when you happen upon this massive gaping staircase leading down into darkness. You step down into the shadows of the store's basement and find yourself in a room that feels just a little too long, and that's when you encounter it what looks like a massive pile of collared shirts. This is the irrational obelisk, and you can fight it, but you can't affect it. It has a near infinite supply of health to the point that attacking it does practically nothing. And it doesn't even attack back. All it does is drain a few mind points from you every turn. You can try and talk to the obelisk, but just like the woman in the forest, there are no answers. Save for the text, you don't know why, but it feels like the obelisk is staring at you constantly without blinking her eyes. The obelisk is as bizarre as it is ambiguous, leading fans to speculate about what it even is or why it's here, some suggesting that it's the staff of the department store fused into one giant, horrifying being. Others theory crafting that it's not actually a monster at all. It's your party losing their minds in the darkness of the basement, seeing threats where there is none. The closest thing we have to an actual explanation is an interview that Miro, the creator of Fear and Hunger, gave to the website Dark RPGs, in which Miro details how the creature was born out of his own phobia of button shirts, combined with an art sculptor he saw as a child. But beyond this, that there was no explanation for it. And I think that lack of explanation, combined with the obelisk's lack of real game mechanics, it makes the creature feel like some awful cosmic entity from beyond the rules and logic that govern this world, leaving you with no real relief from the discomfort it creates, until eventually you just have to walk away, conscious that it will always be there in the darkness of the department store's basement, waiting for you. On a mechanical level, Termina freaks you out by forcing you into scenarios with enemies that drain your resources and punish bad decisions. But on a deeper emotional level, the game disturbs you with ambiguous scenarios where there is no solution, explanation, or understanding. And the beauty of Termina is how these two distinct kind of horrors blend, as you're never really sure which you're about to encounter, leaving you constantly on edge in a state of dread and anxiety as you stumble your way through Central Priville, to the point that this part of the game can be kind of psychologically exhausting, and that is an exhaustion I was now profoundly experiencing in my Levi run. Try as I may, Central Priville was destroying me, to the point that my playthrough with Levi ground to a crawl. I was able to get a few slight wins, like remember Tanaka and Marco, the two characters who mysteriously died on our previous train carriage run? Well, I discovered what actually happened then, when I stumbled into a scene where Pav, another train passenger, holds them at gunpoint, and knowing from my previous run that they were about to die, I could now use that knowledge to save my new okay, never mind. Well, at least I got this wheelchair, and once again, knowing from my previous run that Olivia spends most of her time at the train, I was able to recruit my first ever ally, only for her to disappear on the morning of day 3. By the evening of day 3, I had no party members, no endgame equipment, and was still riddled with withdrawal, and I began to feel a mounting futility. In one last desperate attempt to achieve anything this run, I made my way north to the Priville orphanage, the place where Levi was raised, but all I found was darkness. Futility calcified into hopelessness, and before long, I had to acknowledge that there was nothing I could do. If I was going to save Levi, this wasn't going to be the run that I'd do it, and so with no other option, I abandoned my run, stranding Levi in the darkness he was raised.
Well, that definitely went better than the run where I pissed myself and died, but maybe not by a lot, but it doesn't matter, because the question now is, what could I learn from it? And as we shall see, many things, but the main one was, do not choose a character who is dependent on chemical opioids. So this time, I would choose Abella.
the mechanic. Abella begins the game with a powerful wrench weapon that deals decent damage but can also stun enemies into missing their turn. She can also short-circuit electrically locked doors, which is handy for route management, but maybe her biggest advantage is her weapon craft ability, meaning with a few lucky item drops, you can find yourself assembling an extremely powerful weapon from very early in your run. And so, my path was set, and what unfolded is maybe the most insane run I've ever had in Fear and Hunger. Also, I know that Pyro Cynical already did the dressing as the character's bit, but I had already ordered the clothes, and I don't know what else I would do with yellow overalls. I also know that I look like a fireman stripper who buys his clothes at Spirit Halloween. You don't need to say that in the comments. I'm aware. One of the mistakes I'd made on my Levi run is I'd spent a lot of time exploring aimlessly without any real goal or purpose. And so with Abella, I wanted a solid objective. And so my plan was to make it to Priville Central by the morning of day 2, where I knew from my Levi run that Pav would murder Tanaka and Marco, and given my distaste both for charismatic fascists as well as people who do not button their shirts correctly, my goal would be to take out Pav and save my potential allies. Things started well, as within minutes I'd collected the materials for the extremely powerful Lantern Flail, a high damage weapon that also sets enemies on fire. This transformed my path through Termina, letting me one-shot my way through the early game villagers with a brutality that felt slightly morally dubious before Leon Kennedy himself descended from the heavens and said, "They attacked you first, meaning it's all nice and legal." It was cathartic. The same enemies I had to so carefully sneak by as Levi, I was now bulldozing through as Abella. Abella's short circuit allowing me to quickly access Termina's underground sewer system, which meant I made it to Central Priville on the afternoon of day 1, a full day earlier than my Levi run. Wow, this is going great! Having made it to Central Priville, I thought about my battle with Pav the following morning, and the fact that his pistol could be a real problem. And so I spent the rest of the day searching for armor that would let me absorb his gunshots. And it was while exploring the surrounding buildings that I encountered Levi in the basement of the restaurant. I spent a long time trying to find him his drugs in the sewers, but it was important for me to recruit him and make good on my promise. I took his hand in mine and swore, "This time, Levi, we're both going to make it out of this. No matter what darkness we face, what obstacles we must overcome, I will protect you." Oh, fuck! Levi was immediately beaten to death by a cop, a line that seemed a lot funnier when I wrote it at the start of this year, but got progressively less so from there. Sufficiently armored, I set out the next morning for my battle with Pav, and while his opening gunshot did do a shocking amount of damage, I was able to tank it thanks to my newly acquired armor. And from here, I got to behold a scene that till now has existed only in my dream journal. A muscular woman beating a Nazi to death while setting him on fire. Finally, I was in a timeline where Marco and Tanaka were still alive. But rather than joining my party, the two instead picked up the wheelchair and headed towards the direction of the train. Curious about this, I decided to follow them, and when I did, I entered a scene that made me stop dead, tilt my head, and be like, huh? Marco was showing Tanaka how to box. And this is such a small moment, really just a couple of frames of animation and a few lines of dialogue. But it has these little details, like Tanaka occasionally taking these glances at Marco to check if he's got his stance right, or Olivia watching her two friends from her newly acquired wheelchair. Amidst the horror of Priville, this moment felt like spotting a Game Boy in a swimming pool of tarantula, and in a word, it felt endearing. And I bet if you Control F endearing in my previous Fear and Hunger video, that is not a word you will find. And yet, this is not the only time in Termina I would use that word. Just off the main street in Termina, you will discover a little bar called the Priville Bop. And immediately, something feels different here. As the crackle of soft jazz fills the air and you step into a 1940s style speakeasy, there's no enemies here. No sign at all of the danger and madness that has infected the outside world. What there is candles, ashtrays, little wooden chairs and tables and musical instruments. It's cozy? And you can actually see the train passengers react to this, as when you take them to the bop, they'll spread out across the bar and just relax. And that's because the bop is this one space where they can stop being these terrified survivors and actually just be people. Within its walls, you can have these oddly intimate little moments with them. The underage Marina trying to convince Dan to serve her a drink, or Levi confiding in you that after a childhood of killing and violence, he's scared that he no longer has the capacity to learn to play the piano. Or just you promising Olivia that once you both survive all this, you'll take her to her first real dance. The bop is a place where your characters can feel safe, a sanctuary where the violence and madness that's infected the outside world, it cannot touch them here. And I think that's why it's become such a popular setting for fan art, because it represents this sliver of light in the darkness of Termina's world. If I sound mildly unsettled while talking about this, it's because not only did no location like this exist in Fear and Hunger 1, but because the very idea of the bop goes against so much of what that game was. This is really not a criticism of Fear and Hunger 1, but the purpose of that world felt like it was to inflict pure, unrestrained cruelty, and the main function of its characters was to suffer, and so providing them with an environment like the bop where the purpose is to comfort, that would have felt bizarre in that game. And so the existence of the bop in Termina feels like a massive change in that philosophy, because for all this game is willing to put its characters through, it's also willing to give them moments like this. And I think this speaks to a more core change in how Termina views its characters, and how much more has gone into making them feel like real people. You can see this in everything from the game's far more elaborate character backstories, some of which are practically mini visual novels, to the party talk mechanic, which at any point lets you pull up a scene of your characters and watch as they discuss everything from their current surroundings to opinions on sarcasm. The game also filled with all these little touches that do so much to make them feel alive, like learning that yellow wizard Osa also just really enjoys a practical joke, or that Olivia has a crush on both Marina and Levi. And it's all handled with a care that can give these characters occasionally a shocking amount of depth. Take Samari, the creepy, non-playable train passenger obsessed with Marina to the point of stalking her. Samari starts off the game by killing Marina's father, and things only get worse from there. And to most players, that's how she's going to come across, this obsessive, violent obstacle to be taken out. But there's actually a hidden scene lodged deep within this game, where as Marina, you can find this tiny murderer cowering in the darkness of the nightmare dimension. Here, you can learn that it wasn't out of a desire for violence that caused her to monstrify, but rather an obsessive guilt over what she's done. If you can calm her down and take her back to the train, you can have a further conversation that reveals she killed Marina's father because her telepathy let her see the awful things he was planning to do to her. Also, dude just seemed like kind of a transphobe. And the reason she killed him was both because she's in love with Marina, but also, having been infused with dark magic from childhood, her body is quickly deteriorating, and she wanted protecting Marina to be the one meaningful and good act of her short existence, resulting in a portrait of a complicated, flawed character whose obsession, fear, and acceptance of her own limited mortality drive her to do occasionally monstrous, but ultimately good things. And to be frank, there is a subtlety and tenderness to that character writing I was not expecting from the sequel to the game where anal bleeding is a status effect. That same tenderness is why the scene with Marco, Tanaka, and Olivia hit me so hard. You have Olivia, this genuinely good and kind-hearted person trapped in this nightmare, the twist of her needing a wheelchair feeling especially cruel. But then you have Marco, this gruff, silent gangster who will barely even respond if you try and talk to him. He also might be a little stupid considering how he carries the wheelchair as opposed to, wheeling it. And yet, despite how unapproachable Marco seems, from the morning of day one, you can actually see him standing beside Olivia and keeping watch over her in a protective older brother kind of way. And it's sweet, but then you also have Tanaka, this nervous Japanese-coded businessman who, out of everyone, seems the most terrified when the festival begins. But then he gets to see how brave Marco is protecting Olivia and finds that same courage within himself, forming a friendship with Marco, the two even venturing into the dangerous city together to find Olivia her wheelchair. If Marco later dies, Tanaka can even become a full-on hero-like character in this world, swearing to carry on the spirit of his fallen friend. And so the reason I love this scene outside the train is it's the moment you can see the bonds between these characters solidify into this endearing little found family in the darkness of Termina's world. And that fucking hits, something I can say confidently given the amount of fan art this moment has received. I think this more tender approach to its characters goes a long way to explaining why Termina has amassed such a massive and intense fandom online, with each moment from the game exploded outwards across countless pieces of fan art that now depict every tiny little in-joke, every character quirk, every possible pairing and alternate version of these characters. Like, seriously, just pick any random train passenger and watch as you become buried under an avalanche of fan art. Except Caligora, fuck that guy. The art ranges from extremely cute to deeply disturbing and exists across all mediums. There are now being legions of Fear and Hunger fan animations, from the goofiest, silliest little cartoons to AAA level remake trailers, and the breadth and quality of these videos are kind of staggering, with everything from voice-acted animatics to even Fear and Hunger musicals, which I swear to God have become their own YouTube subgenre.
My diagnosis is that no one has been treating you well.
So what do you prescribe?
No reason or rhyme, make sure you learn your lesson, you'll know better next time. Accidents happen now and again, just when you least expect. I had to sing that one myself because it was copyrighted. Considering Fear and Hunger barely had an online presence 3 years ago when I made that original video, watching it blow up online has honestly been a little bizarre, but it's here I'm going to ask you to humor me as we take a little detour in our story and I discuss my place in that spread. I've seen people cite my video as this kind of inception point for Fear and Hunger, and if you look at the Google Trends, I could understand seeing it like that. But this is also something I felt a little guilty about. Fear and Hunger was a thing before my original video. You had creators like Frappolo94, Dark Raccoon, Mythonomics, Wormgirl, and All Bones Jones, all of whom had poured hundreds of hours into these games before I ever touched them. I was convinced to try Fear and Hunger after a brief mention in a Modular video, only to drop it in frustration before Zuldim's video, The RPG That Hates You, convinced me to give it another shot. So there was already people boosting Fear and Hunger's notoriety to the point that I could discover it, and even after my video, that momentum was further boosted by CDog VA's videos right up until Pyrocynical's recent 8-hour video. My point is that nothing happens in isolation on the internet. The real reason Fear and Hunger blew up is what I said in the intro. It's Fear and Hunger. There is nothing else like this. And I think a huge part of that initial growth spike is actually Termina, as its more caring approach to its characters opened these games up to a new kind of audience, allowing them to spread in a way that only games with intense fandoms do. People love these characters because Termina itself also loves these characters. And right about now, it probably sounds like we're reaching the conclusion that Fear and Hunger 2 is a kinder, gentler game than the original. And as I was about to discover on my Abella playthrough, that would not be the case. For the first time in Central Priville, I was feeling relatively in control, having recruited both Marco and Olivia and equipping them both with powerful crafted items. Even enemies like the Bobbies had become manageable. However, on the afternoon of the second day, something strange happened. Marina died. And that's not too unusual on the surface, right? We know that characters can die off screen, But here's the thing, in both my previous runs, Marina had survived till the very end. And yet now, in the middle of the second day, something had happened to her. The truly baffling part being that across all 3 runs, I hadn't interacted with Marina at all. And yet somehow, something had changed. My only clue being later when I stumbled across Marina's body in the bookshop, only to find she was missing her face. It took me a few different playthroughs to work out exactly what had happened here, and it's a combination of 2 things. The first occurred much earlier in this playthrough, when unbeknownst to me, I had gone to the mayor's mansion and done something. If you go to the mayor's mansion immediately on day 1, you can find Henrik, another train passenger, who will already be going insane, and if you don't tell him to snap out of it, by the afternoon of day 1, he will have transformed into the gentleman, who, if you can survive a ghoulish dinner party, will offer you one of the keys you'll need to open the gates to Priville Center. Whether you encounter Henrik before he transforms or not, the mayor's mansion is a strong early route choice, and a big part of that is because it's a bountiful place for supplies and even some guaranteed armor. However, completely unbeknownst to me, while scavenging the mansion for those supplies, I had unlocked this door. And why does this door matter? If we track Marina's route through the game, she spends the morning aboard the train with the other passengers before heading to the mayor's mansion. If we don't stop Henrik from transforming into the gentleman, which I did not on this run, he captures Marina on the night of day 1 and traps her in this room, where she will be held prisoner for the rest of the game. However, because I unlocked this door earlier that day, it remained unlocked, meaning once Marina was captured, she was able to escape out this door, fleeing the mansion and making her way to Priville Central, where she took refuge in the bookshop, until something happened to her. As for what that something is, well, remember when I said there was 14 characters you'll need to track through the game? The truth is, there's actually 15. So imagine you've just made it to Priville Central and you're gathering supplies and allies and hey, you're starting to feel like you got some real momentum going. But once in a little while, you hear something. Laughter. It sounds cold and devoid of life. You make your way down a narrow alley, and finding yourself facing a dead end, you go back the way you came, only now, someone is waiting for you. The clown saunters gracefully towards you, and immediately attempts to ram syringes into your flesh. Worse, he's shrugging off your attacks with a gleeful grin. And if you try the old reliable tactic of severing his limbs, defeated, you awaken chained to the floor of a blood-rusted basement. You have just had your first encounter with Needles, the murder clown. It will not be your last. Whenever you hear Needles laugh, it means that this bastard clown has just entered your current location and will either be waiting for you at one of its exits or will already be making his way towards you. You can try to outrun him, but he moves extremely quickly, and even if you do manage to get away, he will stalk you from area to area, always appearing at the worst possible time, meaning any moment that you hear that laughter is one of profound anxiety. Needles is Termina's stalker enemy, and because of that, it's easy to compare him to Crowmauler. But the two are less alike than you might think. Crowmauler operates like the world's most terrifying Kool-Aid man, where instead of serving beverages, he dispenses broken bones, ripped eyeballs, and punctured craniums. His cruelty is direct, mechanical, and instant. And Needles doesn't really work like this. Don't get me wrong, Needles can obliterate your run if he catches you before you're ready, but the first time you lose to him, he doesn't even kill you. Instead, you just wake up and a ghost gives you an orgasm, still don't know what's going on here, in a different part of the game and continue. Not only that, but if you have even a moderately decked out party, it's not hard to bum rush Needles and beat him into submission with sheer offense. To the point that the first time you defeat Needles, it can actually feel pretty anticlimactic, and particularly if you were expecting a challenge on the same level as Crowmauler. But that's because Needles isn't Crowmauler. He's Needles. Needles is, not so subtly, based off Art the Clown from Terrifier. And I think one of the most unsettling things about Art the Clown is not just the grotesque and violent ways he murders people, but how he will use their corpses to terrify future victims, turning them into these grotesque advertisements for the violence he's inflicted on others and is now intending to inflict on you. You can actually walk in on scenes where Needles is actively murdering other train passengers, and the delight he takes in these moments is unsettling, like when he murders Tanaka and begins wearing his hat. And this can really fuck up your run, especially if Needles takes out a train passenger you were planning on saving. But the most disturbing scenario with Needles is actually one a lot of players aren't going to see. You know how we mentioned that Needles actually leaves you alive the first time he kills you? Well, it's not immediately apparent, but what's actually happened here is you have been locked into the most disturbing scenario in Termina, because while you're alive, your party members have disappeared. Step out into Priville and you will discover what's happened them. Finding them missing limbs, impaled on fences, butchered, twisted into ghoulish art sculptures, some even reaching out to you as the last moments of their life bleeds out onto the cold pavement. And you realize Needles only left you alive because he wanted you to see what he has done to your friends and is now intending to do to you. That right there is the difference between Needles and Crowmauler. Crowmauler is designed to destroy, but Needles is designed to torment. And the fact that he isn't that hard to kill only makes this more disturbing, because what it means is that he's not this invincible abomination born from dark magic. He's just a guy in face paint, a regular human, but one who chooses to do awful things, leaving you with the question, how could someone become like that? This is Needles the Murder Clown, and he is what happened Marina in the bookstore. Something we can tell by the fact that the next time I encountered Needles, it looked like he was wearing her face. Having survived Needles, my journey through Termina continued, and I was actually starting to build up real momentum. Having cleared out most of Central Priville and collecting 2 of the 3 magic MacGuffins, the path between me and the endgame was rapidly diminishing. You will learn to fear that sound, because what it means is the mob is approaching.
What the hell was that?
The mob occupies the west of Priville and have a percentage chance to trigger whenever you step across specific tiles. Not only do the mob move extremely quickly, but they can also split up and trap you. Look at this bullshit. Look at it. Contact with any one, triggering a fight with all 3. Each has well over 8,000 health, is capable of high damage attacks, but the real threat is this guy in the middle, the appropriately named Meat Grinder, who can kill your party in a single attack. Out of all the enemies in Termina, the mob feel borderline broken. I'd wager they're responsible for more ruined runs than a hand grenade on a racetrack. And over an hour since my last save, the sound of the bottle breaking shot ice through my veins, sending me into a panic that caused me to sprint north, the mob chasing close behind. And knowing that they wouldn't enter the orphanage, I took refuge there and saved my game. I'm safe, I thought, being entirely unaware that I had just signed the death warrant for this run. See, unlike Needles, the mob don't despawn, meaning that when I later left the orphanage, they were waiting for me, blocking the exit. The problem being that there is only one way out of the orphanage, which meant I was trapped. Each time I'd try and leave, and the mob would catch me and slaughter every member of my party. I tried to fight them, it didn't work. I tried to run, it didn't work. Over and over, I tried, but the angle was too tight. I just could not get by them. And with each failed attempt, a harrowing realization crept further into focus. Oh my god, I think my run is over. And eventually, I was forced to face the fact that with no way out, I had to once again abandon my characters to the darkness of the orphanage.
This is the danger of unforgiving game design. Most AAA games are built for you to beat them, and invisible game mechanics like suck to target or bullets dealing more damage at low ammo, these are the unseen helping hands that subtly guide the player towards victory. You will never feel the absence of those mechanics more than in a game like Fear and Hunger, and it genuinely pissed me off. It sucks that after everything, one bad decision could spoil an entire run. But I knew nothing was going to save me here. And so my options were wallow in futility or accept that it was over and start again. So I chose futility.
In what I have come to now recognize as the last desperate prayer of any Fear and Hunger player, I began to comb through my inventory, seeking something, anything that could boost my chances of survival. And wait, the murky vials. They caused fire damage on all targets and could also inflict the burn status effect. Maybe I could try set the mob on fire and then concentrate purely on defense till they burn to death, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. So I picked through every dark corner of the orphanage. A leechmonger ring, an item that restores a percentage of your health in accordance with damage dealt. Wait, the Ring of Wraiths. This would automatically regenerate health every turn, and the two items together could maybe help me last an extra turn or two before obliteration. But again, it wasn't going to be enough. And it's here I noticed something. These small, child-shaped enemies are not particularly difficult, and so I could farm their skulls as an upgrade currency and use that to unlock a new ability. I'm sorry, what's that? Murdering children again? Listen, come here. You want to make a success omelette? You gotta break a few eggs. I scoured the upgrade tree for any ability that might help, and Rot, a spell that weakens all enemies. It depends what they meant by weaken, but that might just be my lifeline out of this nightmare. But there was a problem. Rot took a single turn to charge up, and that was more than enough time for the cocooned man to devour one of my party members. And so I needed something to stop him moving at that first turn. And then I remembered. Abella's Wrench. I could equip all my party members with blunt weapons, giving them each a 25% chance to stun, leaving the cocooned man vulnerable to a blast of rot. I didn't know how likely this was, but it didn't matter. It was all I had. And so I strode out into the courtyard once again. The battle begins and I'm already taking heavy damage, but it didn't matter. I had to concentrate my attacks on the cocooned man, and time slowed to a crawl as I waited to see if he would take his turn or not. I waited, and it happened. The cocooned man missed his turn, letting me immediately blast off a rot, and holy shit. I guess if you hit the cocooned man with rot, part of his cocoon rots off and he becomes a half cocooned enemy, still powerful, but significantly less dangerous, which transformed this battle into a straight up war of endurance. Both sides trading damage back and forth, my Leechmonger Ring and Ring of Wraiths yanking my party members back from the precipice of defeat, all while the mob endured constant flame damage until finally, yes, I had actually done it. The mob was defeated. I had overcome a scenario that had felt genuinely impossible.
This is the flip side of unforgiving game design. While the game will bludgeon you with scenarios that seem impossible, overcoming those scenarios despite everything feels fucking euphoric. And if the mob had despawned or some other invisible mechanic had saved me here, then I never would have got to experience that feeling. And Termina is just a gold mine for moments like this. Take another moment that happened live on stream over at twitch.tv/super Eyepatch Wolf. Here, a bad death mask spawn had caused me to be completely cut off from the east side of the map, meaning I needed to reroute my game through the mob's territory. And I'm creeping down to the bottom of the map, hoping, praying I don't hear that bottle break. When who is waiting for me at the exit?
This meant I now needed to make the choice of either fighting needles with a vastly underprepared party or tracking back through the mob's territory, potentially triggering them with every step. And look at how the death mask, needles, and the mob, all separate gameplay mechanics, had spun together to create this genuinely nerve-shredding scenario. It's moments like this that make Fear and Hunger so pants-shittingly compelling, and if you can find a way through them, there is no other feeling like that. It's just incredible. And that is how I was now feeling on my Abella run. Having survived the mob back in my Abella run, I was now free to explore the rest of Priville at my leisure, but with one huge advantage. The mob drop a weapon that lets Abella craft the Angle Grinder, an ultra-powerful weapon that hits multiple times, inflicts bleeds, and is strong enough to one-shot most enemies and even shred doorways. And this exploded Termina wide open. The bobbies, not a problem. The death masks, not a problem. Margaret Thatcher's ghost, not a problem. With the Angle Grinder and a fully equipped party, the quest to collect the 3 MacGuffins to open the endgame became a mere formality. I was unstoppable at this point, and so by the afternoon of day 3, I was finally staring down the barrel of a complete run. I took one final sleep to save my game, safe in the knowledge that a successful run was just around the corner. Your party members disappeared somewhere. You were left alone while you were sleeping. What? No! What happened? Well, what happened was Moonscorching. So you know how several times this video we have had moments where train passengers will mysteriously transform into horrifying monstrosities? Well, what happened to them is that they moonscorched. This is a slightly nebulous process where characters will be overcome by the influence of the moon god Rare, whose light reveals the dark truths we fear most about ourselves and twists us into that form. There seems to be several different ways this can happen. For example, remember when Olivia mysteriously disappeared during our Levi playthrough? Well, on another run, this happened again, only for me later to encounter Pocket Cat wheeling her empty wheelchair. And if you know anything about this bastard cat, this alone is deeply disturbing. But then you find this terrifying mechanized creature. This is Olivia. The lower half of her body now steel, becoming this ghoulish reflection of how she might fear people see her. And you can see the same in Levi's transformation. We know that Levi is terrified by this idea of how he is now just this living weapon, incapable of real human experiences and terrified by his own capacity to commit violence. And so, his Moonscorched form sees his face, his identity, twisted and erased, distorted into this massive cannon made of flesh, his hands feebly grasping at it, like he himself can't understand what he's become and no longer has any say over the violence he now inflicts on others, transforming him into a literal living weapon. Every single Moonscorched transformation has this same disturbing level of introspection, making physical the darkest part of what these characters fear about themselves. Meaning that the process of Moonscorching is this horrifying but oddly beautiful insight into who these people are. And it's also fucking bullshit! See, what I didn't know is that on the night of day 3, all non-player train passengers, including the ones in your party, Moonscorch, leaving you without allies and in a city overflowing with transformed monsters. The problem being that the route I was now locked into ends in a gauntlet of 4 ultra-difficult boss battles, all of which feel designed to be beaten with a full party. You got this weird furry who rips away limbs and inflicts bleed, this S&M tank that constantly rams you to death with massively damaging coin flip attacks, you got not Griffith, who I don't even know what the fuck's going on here, and finally Logic 1, whose 6 cores will bombard you with magic unless you take them out, even though they constantly regenerate. The real bullshit of this fight being that you also have to inflict enough damage on Logic's main body before it can transform into the more powerful Logic 2, at which point, good fucking night. I had to do all this with a single party member, and after multiple attempts, I couldn't even beat the weird furry. And for the second time this playthrough, I started to feel a real hopelessness creep in. The few times I did make it past Rancid the Sergal, I'd just be bulldozed by the sex tank. This slowly stopped feeling like a difficult scenario I could creatively problem solve my way around, and more like a mathematical impossibility. I just did not have the stats to make it through these attacks. And slowly, I realized my run was over. I had no choice but to start again.
I started my next run knowing that this time I'd have to beat the game before the night of the final day. And so to do this, I chose... No! I had not come this far and survived this much to give up on my Abella run. And so, in yet another final desperate prayer, I scoured my inventory and... Wait.
Remember when Levi had been beaten to death by a cop earlier in this run? Well, I think we can all agree that that was objectively a very bad thing, but what it meant was that because Levi was not around, I had been unintentionally stockpiling heroin for the rest of the run. 4 vials to be precise, and realizing this within my desperation-addled mind, one final insane gambit formed. I could take advantage of the massive but temporary stat boost and use it to blast my way through these different bosses. The problem being that I would need to pound the next vial precisely at the right time to avoid going into withdrawal, at which point my stats would drop dramatically and I'd be doomed. I just want to say again as a gentle reminder that none of this is how chemical opioids actually work. This would mean beating all 4 bosses as well as making it through the ultra difficult endgame area, the White Bunker, before my supply ran out. And so I used every single thing I had learned over the course of this run. Every item, every piece of equipment, the regenerating rings, the rot spell, the murky vials, the angle grinder, all bolstered by my drug-infused mega stats, fusing it all into this last desperate meteor-like attempt to punch my way through Termina's endgame. Until finally, it happened. I had beaten Fear and Hunger 2, and I had done so by never giving up, never losing hope, and believing in myself, and also heroin, but never mind that part.
Watching the credits roll, I asked myself, how did I feel about Termina in comparison to Fear and Hunger 1? And that answer is complicated. While I've spent a lot of this video praising the ambition of Termina, there's also a lot about it that can be frustrating, like the amount of backtracking or how the game now has diagonal movement and yet it's not mapped to the diagonal environments, meaning you have to kind of ping-pong your way through them. To larger bugs and QA problems, big visual glitches, some events not triggering when you enter from the wrong direction, or in 1 or 2 cases, just straight up crashes. My biggest issue though is that there's just parts of the game that really feel like they need a tune-up to hit their full potential. Take Needles. Conceptually, Needles is amazing, a serial killer unleashed on your playthrough. However, the scenario where he kidnaps you and kills your party, that only occurs under a hyper-specific set of conditions, and it's so rare that in the dozen or so runs I've made in Termina, it has never happened. And outside of this, there's actually just not that many interactions with Needles that can occur. And so if you do miss them, yeah, the character probably does just feel like an easier crow mauler.
Hello friends, it's midnight before I post this video, and I wanted to drop a little note here to say that I've done further tests and I'm starting to wonder, is the Needles kidnaps and kills your party scenario even in the game? And I don't know, I've seen very convincing footage of it, but I can't actually find any trace of it in the game. Like, I just cannot trigger it. So I could be wrong. If it is a fan-made thing, it's really cool, and maybe something that could make it into Termina eventually with an update. But yeah, I don't know, and I just wanted to say that because I don't want to say something unless I'm completely sure of it. That's all. I can't investigate it anymore. I need to get my life back from Fear and Hunger Termina. Patreon.com/Super Eyepatch Wolf if you have any interest in my continued existence. Thank you. I'd have other criticisms as well, like the fact that the really interesting decision making only really feels like it gets started when you hit Priville Central, or that there's some playable characters' stories that just don't feel as developed as others. But ultimately, I don't know that there is any point listing out these criticisms, because any day now, there is a long-awaited patch scheduled to drop, with whole new areas, new enemies and events, as well as a complete rebalance of the gameplay. Am I worried that this patch is going to come out the day I release this video, immediately invalidating months of work? Yes, but I also don't think that's a bad thing, as if you've watched this far into the video and are maybe worried that you now know too much about Termina, well, depending on when you play it, you could potentially be entering a very different Priville. But ultimately, right now, I can only judge the game that's in front of me. And staring into the empty train carriage of this game's closing credits, I did feel oddly unsatisfied. It's like there was just some part of this game that I wasn't connecting with. And so forming my final opinion on it was difficult. And so I decided to keep going, starting multiple different runs with different objectives in each. And here is a brief montage of how they went. In this one, I fought the secret super boss of Termina, the Heartless one, and she's really hard. I hadn't felt this emasculated since a muscular Japanese woman picked me up in her arms and called me her princess. I'll leave you to figure out if that actually happened or not. On this run, my legs got cut off, and because I'm an idiot, I just kind of kept going because I thought there'd be like a big payoff or like something I could do a big bit with, and that there wasn't. It just took a really long time, and yeah, I do not recommend doing a legless run in Termina. I also did a run as Olivia, and her wheelchair mechanics are actually really interesting in how they change how you can navigate the world. But yeah, not a lot happened here. I did stream it, and at one point I fed Olivia a bunch of carrots and said, "Eat your carrots, Olivia," and someone did this fan art, which I thought was cute.
So John wanted me to dress up as Osa for this bit, probably for obvious reasons. But yeah, so John did a meso mode and it went very poorly. What is this shit, John? What are we doing? And I also think it's really important to understand that Osa does the dance macabre. I just feel like there's a reason that this exists. Because this charges up his magic attack. And so once he starts getting this in, you're fucking dead. Don't get too close to him either while he's meditating, because he will fuck you up. He will knock a fucking leg off.
This one was actually pretty chill. I just saved all the characters and gathered them all in the bop, and we all just had like a big party. And Henrik even cooked this special gumbo, which was just like really cool. Wait, no, Henrik, what did you do? What did you do, Henrik? However, there was one run I made that felt different from the others, and this run would change how I saw Termina completely. When a game of Termina begins, you have the choice of two basic paths. Try and survive the festival and protect the other train passengers, which sets you on the route to logic, or hunt down and kill every other contestant, crowning you the lone champion of Termina. This would be the path I was now taking. And I would choose Marco
to do it. Marco's a boxer and therefore proficient in unarmed combat, and I figured this would give me an advantage early on as I wouldn't need to find powerful weaponry to pose a threat to the other characters.
The game opens with most of the passengers gathered around the train, and in theory, this would be the perfect time to take out, well, whoever I wanted. But I knew from my Levi run that doing so would lock me into the captured route. Even when the group dispersed, certain train passengers clumped together, making attacking them difficult, with stronger characters protecting the weak. And some would prove a real problem. Like Marina. Marina uses powerful magic, but her spell Black Smog is especially dangerous, as even if you do kill her, it can leave you blind, which means your run now looks like this and is over. I would need to be patient and wait till the train passengers were alone and vulnerable. And that's when I remembered. Karen. Karen peels off from the group nearly immediately before pausing at the riverside. I would use this brief moment of isolation to my advantage. As I approached Karen on the waterfront, immediately it felt strange, counterintuitive even. Not only had I been doing everything I could on previous runs to protect the other train passengers, but I liked Karen. Any woman willing to admonish a man by telling him he has soft hands is a woman I appreciate. I did not want to do this, but I had a goal, and that's what I told myself when minutes later, Karen lay dead. What struck me was how easy it was. Karen wasn't this otherworldly monster with massive stocks of health. She was just a person. Killing her had been simple. Something in my mind shifted, and I realized that meticulous character map I had constructed over multiple playthroughs now became a kill list. However, I knew not everyone was going to be this easy. Not only did characters like Osa and Abella pose a real threat, but soon contestants would begin to Moonscorch, and if I wanted to kill them, I'd need to get stronger. And so I formed a plan. Every time you kill a passenger in Termina, you absorb their soul, acquiring their abilities. And so I decided I would target the most vulnerable train passengers first, absorbing their abilities till I could take on the most dangerous. And so, who would I target first? And that's when I remembered sweet little carrot-munching Olivia, who I knew from my Levi playthroughs spends the second day alone at the train, and with her protectors in the city, killing her would not be a problem. I returned to the train on the morning of day 2, and there she was, picking flowers in the forest, nothing separating me from her. The irony that I was playing as Marco, her friend and protector, was not lost on me. I began to feel guilty. This felt wrong. I did not want to do this, but unfortunately for Olivia, I had to. I felt genuine disgust with what had just happened, but unfortunately, I wasn't done. See, the most valuable currencies in Termina are the heads of the other contestants, which can be traded for powerful items like skin Bibles and books of enlightenment. I would need those, which meant I had no choice. Things only grew more grim from here. Hey, Levi! Remember how I promised we were both gonna make it out all this? Well, today's the day, little buddy. And I was thinking, when we make it, what say we go for some hot dogs? You ever had a hot dog, Levi? Why, I got a photo of one right here. That's right. Just look at the photo, Levi. I was on my chosen path, but unfortunately, some problems had started to present themselves. Targeting particular characters at particular times and locations meant that saving my game had become a way more limited resource, and having murdered several potential allies at this point, as well as some bad luck with item drops, I was already struggling with the mid-game enemies of Priville Center, and so I needed to change tactics. Rather than just outright attack and kill the other characters, I would instead recruit them, fight with them as allies, and dispose of them later. This would give me the manpower I needed to make it through the mid-game, while I figured out a way to deal with more dangerous fights like Marina. I knew Marina would be a powerful ally, so I went to the bookstore and recruited her before Needles could kill her. She, completely unaware that I had already murdered half the cast. But she proved exactly the momentum shift I needed to make progress once again. And it's here something strange happened. I had taken a weird route through Priville, and while I was doubling back through the main entrance, I encountered an event that I had completely forgotten about. Pav killing Tanaka and Marco. But this time, I was playing as Marco. And from what I can tell, this meant that Marco was not present to start a fight with Pav, meaning this event was just now Tanaka by himself. Not wanting to kill Tanaka in front of Marina, lest she figure out my deal, I exchanged pleasantries with Tanaka and let him go, him carrying a wheelchair. Oh God! Oh Jesus! I realized Tanaka was taking the wheelchair back to Olivia, where instead he would discover her headless corpse. What would happen when he found out what I had done? Would he be able to piece together that I had just come from that direction? No, I thought that's impossible. There's no way the game could account for a scenario this fucked up and specific. But I had to find out. I turned around and made my way back to the train. As I stepped through the forest, all those pieces of fan art of Olivia, Marco, and Tanaka being this weird little found family, they all came flooding back. These three people who had found comfort in each other in a world of utter darkness. This felt too fucked up. This felt genuinely terrible. I had never been made feel this guilty by a video game, and in that moment I finally understood why some people refuse to do a no mercy route in Undertale. But no, it would be okay. The game could not account for this. That was what I was telling myself when Tanaka appeared, not where he was meant to be in front of the train, but taking slow, agonized steps towards me. He knew. Filled with horror and rage at what I had done, Tanaka attacked. But Marina didn't know this. She did not know why Tanaka was attacking. She did not know that I had just murdered someone. She did not know that she was about to help me murder another, and she really didn't know that later I was planning to do the same thing to her. I was a terrible person. I had turned these people against each other, but I wasn't done. I decided to recruit Dan to help me remove some of the more challenging obstacles in my path. We collected the 3 magical MacGuffins till finally the only passengers left alive were me, Dan, and Marina, and I still needed a solution to the Marina problem. So I decided to try something. We left Marina alone in the Priville Bop, and I took Dan for a little walk in the forest. There's a mechanic in Fear and Hunger where you can saw off a character's limbs, useful if that character gets an infected arm or leg, which can cause instant death. This was a constant worry in 1, but in 2, less so given the abundant supply of recovery items. But perhaps I had found a new use for this mechanic. I instructed Dan to cut off his own arm, which he obliged. And then the other arm. By the time we got to his legs, he needed some help. Eventually, Dan had run out of limbs, and I assured him that everything would be okay. Soon, any attempt to communicate with him was met with the text, "Here lies Dan." This would be my way to circumvent Marina's magic. I returned to the Bop and collected her. I felt insane, walking Marina through the silent forest. She was my first ally and had been with me early in the run, and I felt a fondness for my little trans witch. We had overcome so many awful things together. She had even defended me when Tanaka attacked without question. I couldn't believe how intense this felt. We arrived at our destination, a shrine to Grogoroth. See, what I was going to do was have Marina cut off her own arms, removing her abilities to cast spells and defend herself, and when she did that, I would sacrifice her to the god of destruction, reaping his boons. Only, oh no, my arm plant didn't work. It would not matter. I stared down at Marina's body. My sins washed over me, and I realized I had succeeded in killing them all. And that's when it hit me. I had become the murder clown! What is the cruel thing waiting in the dark of Termina? It's you. It's the player. And it's like, okay, indie video game, very good. I see what you did there. The player is evil. I've done this dance before. But then you think about how this repeating theme across all of Termina is ordinary people's capacity to inflict cruelty. Something you can see constantly throughout Priville and in the moon-scorched forms of every single character. Hell, something you can even see in the main menu. And it's like, no, that feels bad. People aren't like that. We are better than that. And then you think about how so much of the horror of Termina pulls from our own history, draws from things that actually happened. And it's like, oh, we are like that. We always have been. And I think that's probably the grimmest possible message this game could have conveyed. And yeah, when I take a step back and look at Termina as a whole, I can't help feel something kind of hopeful in there as well. Because for as fucked up and awful as the world it conveys is, there's also these little fleeting bright spots. Moments when honest human connection pushes through the darkness and empathy wins out over the cruelty that surrounds it. And that to me is the biggest difference between Fear and Hunger 1 and 2. Fear and Hunger 2 has empathy. And the message I choose to take from that is that you can't really control the cruelty of the world around you. You can only control the empathy you put back out into it. And given the state of everything right now, and how our history seems to be repeating itself, I think that's a pretty good message. You know, I had to rewrite those last couple of lines a few times, and I wasn't really thinking about how when I said them, I'd still be in the murder costume outfit, and that feels a bit awkward. This isn't how the video ends, right? Oh, jeez. Friends, a reminder that my new webcomic, Eyepatch Wolves, is out now at eyepatchwolvescomic.com. You can check out the first 5 chapters for free by scanning the QR code on screen. New chapters unlocking weekly. Friends, thank you for joining me, and I really hope you enjoyed today's video. It was long overdue, and thank you to everyone who contributed $35,000 in one of my charity streams to force me to make this. If you'd like to support this channel, you can head on over to patreon.com/SuperEyepatchWolf, where you can find a range of exclusive videos, and also have your name listed right here. I know that there's a lot of people to the point that this is starting to look like that one joke from The Simpsons Season 7, but I do really appreciate it. Find me on the Versus Wolves podcast, as well as Blue Sky at Eyepatch Wolves. Friends, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.